Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is my buddy Mike Bubb. He's going to share some personal stories about touring with Tony Rice.
My friend Bryn Davies, who was playing with Peter Rowan at the time, Peter Rowan and Tony Rice, she shoehorned me into that gig and basically said, "You want to play with Peter and Tony? Because I'm getting ready to bow out." And I said, "Well, I think that's a little over my head. I don't know that I could." She said, "You can do it." And the next thing I know, I'm playing with Peter Rowan and Tony Rice, two of the biggest icons of the music. And that was just fantastic, and a big learning experience, You always want to be in situations where you're getting pulled up to another level. As a bass player, the hardest place to stand as a bass player in this music would be between Peter Rowan and Tony Rice. One who was a meticulous perfectionist, and the other who was just a product of his environment and a creative force of daily influences and this and that, and how those two work together and how they, and then had to stand between the two and keep time for them. It's a big responsibility and challenging for sure. And I really enjoyed that time. I wish I had gotten to know Tony Rice better. But he was kind of enigmatic at that time. You wouldn't see him until right before the show. He would drive up. He'd come in, get his guitar out, light a cigarette, go in the bathroom, and you would just hear him just noodle and play for 30 minutes. He would never come to sound check. And then it'd be time to play, and you'd go out and play the show. And then he might stick around and have a sandwich or something afterward, and then in the car and gone into the night. I don't know where he's going. Never had breakfast with the man, never had dinner with him. I got to talk to him at gigs and stuff, but you'd hear everything that Tony Rice ever played and recorded. I mean, it was all strung together and just his sort of different signatures. You would hear him playing those things. He had bad arthritis, developing arthritis, and he drove himself everywhere. He had a Lightning pickup truck, which is like a super sport pickup. It's got a racing engine in it basically, and he had a Shelby Mustang that he drove everywhere, and he just liked to drive. He wouldn't get on an airplane. He would drive to California, Colorado, wherever. And I remember one time we played this festival in Michigan called the Rothbury Festival. It was a sort of a junior version of Bonnaroo, and I get a call from Tony. He says, "Man, my Mustang's broke down. I got a problem with the turbo on it. I'm not going to make the gig." And of course, me thinking, well, that's not acceptable. How do we get Tony Rice here? What I didn't realize, he was telling me, I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to make it. I said, "Well, where are you at?" "I'm at a hotel outside of Chicago or somewhere, I'm like, "Well, why don't you just rent a car and leave the Mustang there?" "I can't leave the Mustang, man." Like, okay. Again, I didn't realize. I'm trying to figure out every way we can get him there. And he could give a shit, He's just like, I'm not going to make it. I finally realized that, So we play the gig, and there's no Tony. And we did it without him. And somebody else stepped in with us, sat in with us that happened to be there, a musician friend. And at the end of the thing, I said, I told Peter Rowan, I said, "Hey, when you go in there," I said, "you might as well just pick up Tony's check too." And he just laughed, and he went to get paid, and they said, and when he came back out, he said, "You're not going to believe what they asked me." I said, "What's that?" They said, "What should we do with Mr. Rice's check? Send it to the office?" And I go, "Yeah, just send it to the office." I mean, they had no idea that he wasn't even there on campus. That tells you the importance of our set amongst all these people. And it was funny because they had that day it was touring for a while, was the Grateful Dead and Willie Nelson and Bob Dylan. So that package was at the festival, and I got to see all those guys. Yeah. Right? How can we do this without him? As I'm thinking, and he's just like, "I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to be there."
Like, do I have enough time to drive to Chicago and get him and
right.
Come back? Or?
It would never happen, because who knows where he was? He might have never even left his house. I mean, I'm not saying he could have lied to me. I'm just saying that you just don't know. Yeah. Everything's kind of vague, and usually on a long trip like that, he'd have a guy riding with him. Somebody would go with him, you know. But he did all the driving, and it beat him up, you know, over the years. He got to where his back was just terrible. You know, he could barely, at the end of a show, you know, you could just tell he was in a lot of pain, and he had to get in his car and drive somewhere, you know. We played a show in Clayton, New York, which is basically where I-81 ends, and it's known as Thousand Islands. It's on the St. Lawrence Causeway up there. And it's called Thousand Islands because out in the St. Lawrence River, there's all these islands that all of the glitterati and the elite of New York used to have cabins out there. And they used to, you know, go around in those beautiful mahogany speedboats from island to island and spend their summers up there. Chris Craft, yeah. And there's actually the Antique Boat Museum is there in Clayton if you ever go. It's a fantastic museum. They have unbelievable collection of mahogany speedboats and stuff, and they do excursions and that sort of thing. But anyway, we played the Clayton Opera House, which is an old, you know, vaudeville house, basically, still there. And so we get there for sound check, and we had played in Burlington the night before. When we came across the lake on a ferry, Tony Rice drove all the way up to Canada and around the lake and down. And we had a young bluegrass band that was opening up for us. And so when Tony looked at the contract, he thought, well, we don't play till 9:15 after this other band plays, you know. He just assumed that we played late. And so we're, you know, we do sound check, and we're up in the green room, and the lady that runs the theater comes up and she says, "Where is Mr. Rice? Has anybody talked to him?" I said, "Well, he'll be here. You know, we've talked to him earlier, but he usually just doesn't come to sound check. He'll just arrive before the show." Well, it got to be showtime, and then the band went on. The early opener went on. He still wasn't there, and I said, "Look, I said he'll be here. It's just maybe he's got a time mix-up or something, delay." I said, "But we can start without him. You know, we'll go out." And she said, "I hired a quartet, not a trio." So she was all uptight and worried about Tony and being there. And so now the opening band has finished their set, and it's like an extended. We're still waiting for Tony. So 30 minutes goes by. The crowd's been sitting there for 30 minutes. And all of a sudden, we hear Tony's Mustang pull up outside the stage door. He comes in, he's all regal, you know, fully suited, cane, guitar. She goes, "We have been waiting for you for 2 hours," and this and that. She says, "You need to be on stage right now." He says, "Well, I'm going to need to tune up first." And Peter Rowan just walks right out on stage by himself and just starts playing and singing. And then slowly we joined Peter on stage, and then Tony came out. Place goes crazy. Did a 2-hour show. It was good, you know. And the guys that were in the opening band, they were from Nashville. I cannot remember their name to save my life. But afterward, everything seemed fine. And one of the guys in the other band was playing Tony's guitar, and he was hanging out, you know, and chatting with these guys. And here she comes. Here comes the promoter lady from the theater. She says, "They're going to hear about this at Keith Case's office, you know, this and that." And he says, "Lady, let me ask you one thing. Did anybody leave disappointed?" She goes, "That is not the point." He said, "That's my point entirely." He cased up that guitar, click, 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 and down the stairs and out. And he left, and that was it. He was gone. And, you know, it's show business. Stuff happens all the time, you know, stuff that you can't do anything about. You just have to deal with it in the moment. And that's one thing about Peter Rowan is that he can walk out in front of 5,000 people and just pull them right in with a little ballad, a song of some sort. You know, he's a real troubadour in that sense. And, you know, not everybody has that magic, but he has it. And so he was able to sort of tame the situation, and it all worked out just fine, you know. Our last gig, I think we played in Charlottesville, Virginia, at a theater there. And we took some pictures together because it was the last thing we had on the books. But then we all went our separate ways after that show. And then he did some more shows on his own. I think he was getting growing pains with the Peter Rowan thing. He'd been playing with Peter for almost 10 years. And, Peter's a road dog. He's 81 years old, man. He's out on the road all the time still. But I think he just wanted to get back to doing his thing, And we had Josh Williams playing mandolin with us on some dates. And so he basically knows the entire Tony Rice catalog, vocally and instrumentally. And so he started going out and playing dates and singing Tony's songs. And the Tony Rice unit was sort of regrouped together until he just really couldn't drive anymore. And then he just kind of, at some point, he just went home and stayed there, and not really anybody heard from him much until he ultimately passed away a couple of years ago. He was kind of laying low. He was having all kinds of arthritis problems and back problems, and just traveling was not something that he could do comfortably anymore. Yeah, he became really reclusive. He's famous for working on these Accutron Space View watches. That was a real passion of his. So anybody that you ever see that's either a real Tony Rice fanatic or fan, or anybody that played with J.D. Crowe and in that sort of ilk of bluegrass, they all wear those watches. And if, the ones that got them from Tony Rice are particularly special because he would always handwrite these beautiful descriptions of the watch, the work that was done on it, dated. He had beautiful handwriting. And he would write down everything about the watch and give you this detailed information on it, and came with every watch that he repaired personally. But he had like a whole watch shop in his basement, I guess. Because I asked him one time, I said, "Tony, what do you do in your spare time?" And just joking with him, really. And he said, "Well, mostly I work on watches down in my basement." He said, "I've got every tool that you need to rebuild a watch, And these Accutron Space View, they're really neat. They have all the parts are different color, and of course you can see right through the face of it to the workings of the watch. But it's got a tuning fork that vibrates between two magnets inside, that's powered by a battery, and so it's incredibly accurate because it just never moves. And he was an expert at tweaking those and tuning them up, and repairing them. And he would buy watch parts from jewelry stores going out of business and that sort of thing. He was the expert on those things.
That's a crazy level of meticulous right there.
Yeah. Well, it just, it carries over to his music was the same way. He was a very, and everything that he did was very detail oriented, just from the way he dressed to the way that he played to the way that his guitar was set up, very easy to play. His guitar was just like butter, He didn't work very hard to have to play it. And a lot of people, when they would play his guitar, they go, "Wow, I can't believe how low the action is on this thing." But that's really so that he could, play all night. Made it easier. But everything was very finely tuned. And he thought about all those things all the time, Very mechanical oriented guy.